This isn't a prediction. It's a diagnosis. Empires don't collapse from surprise. They rot in sequence. And right now, the United States is in stage 6 of 7. The same pattern that took down Rome, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union is now unfolding in real time, not symbolically but mathematically. Our national debt is $36.70 trillion, growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest payments alone now cost more than the entire defense budget. We've printed over 40% of all US dollars in existence in the last 4 years. 25% of all US adults skipped meals in 2024 due to rising food costs. 1 in 5 American kids lives in poverty. The government is fractured. The public is angry. The currency is debased. Trust is gone. The world is already moving on. And the elites? They've already left the building with their money offshore and their passports ready. This is not decline. It's not mismanagement. It's collapse. And it's already started. Let me show you the 6-stage sequence. We're almost at the end. 6. Loss of reserve currency status. The dollar's crown is slipping. You probably don't feel it yet. Most Americans don't. But that's exactly how the 6th warning sign works. It doesn't arrive like a bombshell. It starts as a whisper. A few central banks here. A few trade agreements there. A growing number of quiet rejections. And then one day your dollars don't buy what they used to. Not because of inflation, but because the world doesn't want them anymore. The privilege that has defined the American century, being the world's reserve currency, is not a birthright. It's a status earned through stability, trust, and dominance. And right now, that dominance is crumbling. Fast. Here's what most people don't know. For decades, over 60% of global foreign exchange reserves were held in US dollars. But by 2022, that number had dropped below 58%. In 2023, it fell below 55%. And in 2024, the International Monetary Fund reported the dollar had declined to just under 52%, the lowest level in 28 years. Meanwhile, the Chinese yuan, despite being heavily controlled and artificially managed, more than doubled its share in global reserves in the same time frame. Central banks from Brazil to India to Saudi Arabia are building gold reserves instead of holding dollars. And why wouldn't they? Since 2020, we've printed over $6 trillion in new money. If you were managing another country's wealth, would you park it in a currency that inflates on political whim? BRICS isn't just a diplomatic acronym anymore. It's an economic alliance actively building an alternative global payment system. Their goal is explicit: reduce dependence on the US dollar. In 2023, over 30% of oil trade between China and the Gulf states was settled in yuan, a number that was effectively 0% a decade ago. Russia and China trade almost exclusively in their own currencies. Now, even France recently bought LNG from China, in yuan. That's a NATO ally, not some rogue state. Losing reserve currency status doesn't look like a crash, it looks like erosion. But the collapse it triggers, that's a crash. Because once the world doesn't need to hold dollars anymore, those dollars come flooding back home. That's trillions in overseas dollars suddenly chasing domestic goods. The result? Currency devaluation, import shock, hyperinflation. The exact thing that destroyed post-war Britain's global role and the Soviet ruble's last gasp of credibility. We are not immune. And the most dangerous part? We're not doing anything to stop it. We're accelerating it. Weaponizing the dollar through sanctions, blowing out deficits, and assuming our currency is eternal. It's not. The British pound thought it was too. But by the 1970s, it had collapsed by over 75%. The dollar is approaching that same cliff. One BRICS summit, one oil shock, one sovereign default away. Stage 6 is here. We're not anticipating it. We're living it. 5. Capital flight and de-dollarization. The exodus nobody wants to talk about. Let me tell you a secret that no empire wants to admit out loud. The rich always leave first. They don't wave flags. They don't make speeches. They quietly move their money, their businesses, their families, because they see what's coming before anyone else. When empires stumble into stage 5, capital flight begins. When they hit stage 6, it becomes a stampede. And that's exactly what's happening to the United States right now. The biggest transfer of wealth out of America since the 1930s, and nobody wants to talk about it. Look at the numbers. In 2023, U.S. foreign direct investment outflows hit $373 billion, a 22% increase from the previous year. Meanwhile, inflows dropped by 12%. Wealth isn't just being created abroad, it's fleeing. American billionaires are buying property in New Zealand, Switzerland, Singapore. U.S. hedge funds are moving operations to Dubai. Digital nomads are setting up shop in Portugal and Thailand. The rich are hedging, diversifying, offshoring, not because they hate America, but because they see the writing on the wall. You don't abandon the ship because it's sinking. You abandon it because the captain refuses to admit it's sinking. And don't think this is just about the ultra-rich. Central banks across the world have been dumping U.S. Treasury bonds for the past 5 years. In 2014, China held $1.27 trillion in U.S. debt. Today, $767 billion. Japan, down over $300 billion. Russia, they dumped nearly all their treasuries in 2018. Why? Because holding U.S. assets is no longer a sign of strength. It's a risk. A risk of sanctions, of devaluation, of instability. America is no longer seen as the safest bet. It's seen as a country whose politics are ungovernable, whose economy is addicted to debt, and whose currency is being inflated on a scale that terrifies even our allies. You probably don't see this capital flight because it's not broadcast on the evening news. It's hidden in footnotes of IMF reports, in central bank filings, in real estate markets 8,000 miles away. But make no mistake, it's happening. The U.S. government is running record deficits, issuing trillions in new debt, and foreign buyers aren't showing up to the auctions anymore. That means the Fed has to step in, print more, monetize the debt. And the more we do that, the more the cycle accelerates. This is the same loop that destroyed confidence in the Spanish silver coin. The same spiral that led Britain to abandon the gold standard. The same desperation that turned the ruble into confetti. Capital leaves before collapse. By the time the middle class notices, it's too late. The lifeboats are already gone. 4. Internal division and political breakdown. The empire that can't govern itself. What do you call a country that can't agree on who won the last election? That has one major political party calling the other illegitimate? That openly talks about secession, civil war, or military coups, not as distant hypotheticals, but as topics on mainstream television. That's not a functioning democracy. That's a collapsing empire at stage 4. And if you think I'm exaggerating, go look at Gallup's numbers. In 2023, just 28% of Americans said they had confidence in the federal government. That's the lowest ever recorded. And among young Americans, it's even worse. Less than 20% believe our political system works. That's not dysfunction. That's disintegration. Empires don't fall because of external enemies first. They fall because the people inside the walls no longer believe in the system. Rome didn't collapse when the Goths sacked the city. It collapsed when Roman senators were bribing barbarian generals. The USSR didn't end because NATO invaded. It ended because Russians no longer believed anything coming out of Moscow. And here in the US, you can't even get a majority to agree on what the Constitution means anymore. Every Supreme Court decision is a culture war. Every election is a battle over legitimacy. And it's not just talk anymore. In 2024, the FBI reported a record number of domestic terrorism investigations, over 3,000 active cases, the vast majority involving political motivations. And let's talk geography. We are already two countries. Urban America and rural America are culturally, economically, and politically incompatible. The difference between San Francisco and rural Mississippi is not a difference in preference, it's a difference in civilization. One believes in central government, globalism, and climate change. The other believes in local control, national identity, and economic sovereignty. These aren't minor disagreements, they're irreconcilable visions of reality. Add in technology, and now the division is weaponized. Every person lives in their own algorithmic echo chamber. One side watches MSNBC, the other Fox, or worse, TikTok and Telegram. Each group believes the other is not just wrong but evil. In Rome, it was the patricians versus the plebeians. In France, the aristocracy versus the revolutionaries. In the USSR, the apparatchiks versus the reformers. In America, it's the blue states versus the red. And when that trust is gone, when half the country believes the other half is trying to destroy it, then the system can't govern, it can't legislate, it can't even function. And here's the real death blow: when the empire needs unity to survive a crisis, whether it's war, economic collapse, or currency failure, it won't get it. In 2020, a virus shut down the world, and Americans didn't rally together. They fought each other in grocery store aisles, refused masks, attacked nurses, threatened each other over vaccines. That was the test, and we failed. Completely. This isn't partisan. This is mathematical. No empire survives this level of internal division. None. And the United States is deeper into it than any of us want to admit. 3. Collapse of public trust and institutional failure. When no one believes anything anymore. There's a moment in every dying empire when the people stop believing in everything. Not just in politicians, but in money, media, medicine, science, law, and even truth itself. When that moment comes, the collapse is no longer hypothetical. It's inevitable. Because a society that doesn't trust its institutions cannot function. That's stage 3. And according to every single metric we have, the United States is already there. Start with Congress. In 1973, over 42% of Americans had confidence in Congress. By 2024, it was down to 7%. Not a typo. 7. The Supreme Court? Down to 18%. Even lower after controversial decisions that split the nation on abortion, gun rights, and executive authority. The presidency? Only 36% say they have confidence in the office, no matter who holds it. And the media? Forget it. Only 11% trust what they see on the evening news. More Americans believe in UFO cover-ups than in government honesty. That's not just cynicism, that's a breakdown in epistemology. We don't agree on what's real anymore. And it's not abstract. This collapse of trust shows up in every part of life. In 2023, over 51% of Gen Z said they don't believe capitalism works. Not that it's flawed, that it doesn't work. Nearly 60% of Americans believe their children will be worse off than they are. That's the highest pessimism rate since the Great Depression. Meanwhile, institutions that were once sacred, public schools, hospitals, police, churches, are all under siege. Teachers are quitting in record numbers. Over 200 hospitals have closed in rural America since 2005. And in 2024, the U.S. military failed to meet its recruitment targets across every branch. That's not a blip. That's systemic. Even the currency, what we all agree on as money, is losing its credibility. In 2024, over 20% of U.S. adults bought cryptocurrency, not as an investment, but as a hedge against their own government. Gold purchases by private Americans hit all-time highs. People are checking out, voting with their feet, with their wallets, with their attention. And every institution knows it. That's why they double down. Censor harder. Police speech. Gaslight the public. Because deep down, they know they've lost legitimacy. Spain went through this in the 1600s. The people stopped trusting the currency, the crown, the church. Britain in the 1940s. Millions gave up on the empire and migrated to Canada, Australia, America. The Soviet Union in the 1980s. Nobody watched state TV. They listened to Voice of America on illegal radios. They bought goods on the black market. They stopped caring. And that's where we are now. A society where everyone knows the system is broken, but no one knows what comes next. Stage 3 is not a warning sign. It's a scream, echoing from the ruins of every fallen power before us. And it's happening now. 2. Rapid centralization, followed by system breakdown. When control becomes chaos, when an empire realizes it's losing control, its first instinct isn't humility, it's overreach. Not abroad, at home. The leaders don't decentralize, they centralize. They don't empower local systems, they strangle them. They pass sweeping executive orders, clamp down on dissent, expand surveillance. And they tell themselves it's necessary to save the system. That's stage 2. It always looks like strength, until the system buckles under its own weight. And the terrifying part? We are already deep in it. Look around. The U.S. federal government controls more of American life in 2025 than at any point in our history. Over 30% of all income in the country now comes from the government, through welfare, subsidies, Social Security, tax credits, and payroll. That's not a safety net, that's dependency. During COVID, the federal share of GDP exploded from 21% to over 44%. That's wartime-level centralization. But unlike worldwide, we never ramped down. The controls stayed, the spending never stopped, and the bureaucracy metastasized. In 2023 alone, regulatory agencies issued over 90,000 new rules, many with the force of law, bypassing Congress entirely. Executive power is no longer a balance, it's the primary mode of governance. Presidents now legislate through emergency declarations. Agencies police speech. intelligence departments monitor domestic financial transactions. And the IRS just got $80 billion to expand surveillance under the Inflation Reduction Act. Most of it aimed at small business and the middle class, not the billionaires. That's not capitalism. That's technocratic command and control. The irony is brutal. The more centralized things become, the less they work. Public education is collapsing, yet the Department of Education grows. The VA can't handle veterans, but the budget doubles. Infrastructure rots, but more permits are needed to fix a sidewalk. Like the Soviet Union in the 1980s, we're drowning in bureaucracy that solves nothing and costs everything. The more the system tries to manage, the more it paralyzes itself. And when decentralization finally does come, it's not orderly. It's collapse. The USSR tried to reform with glasnost and perestroika. The result? The entire union dissolved in under 3 years. Yugoslavia tried to federalize after decades of dictatorship. The result? Genocide and civil war. America thinks it's different. But we're seeing cracks already. Texas threatens legal nullification. Oregon counties vote to join Idaho. States refuse to enforce federal laws. When Washington, D.C. loses credibility, it doesn't shrink. It panics. Then it breaks. Stage 2 is the final pressure cooker. And when it fails, the explosion follows. That's next. 1. The shock event. When collapse goes from theory to reality. This is the moment no one can predict but everyone can feel. The tipping point. The spark. The trigger. History always gives us one. A single event that pulls the curtain down and reveals the empire as hollow. It's the moment when collapse goes from slow-motion erosion to immediate, undeniable freefall. For Rome, it was the sack of the city by the Visigoths in 410 AD. For France, it was the storming of the Bastille. For the USSR, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall. For the United States, it hasn't happened yet. But it's coming. What kind of shock event are we talking about? Could be a global currency crisis. Imagine Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia announce a gold-backed energy trading bloc. Overnight, oil is no longer priced in dollars. Trillions flood back into U.S. markets. The dollar tanks. Imports vanish. The Fed can't print its way out without triggering hyperinflation. Panic hits Wall Street. Markets crash. Credit seizes up. Stores empty. You think supply chains were fragile in 2020? That was the rehearsal. This would be the main act. Or it could be a military humiliation. Taiwan falls. The U.S. Navy suffers massive losses. We lose a carrier group to hypersonic missiles. And suddenly the myth of American invincibility shatters. Allies panic. NATO splinters. Japan, South Korea, Europe, they start negotiating with China directly. Just like how France and India turned away from Britain after Suez in 1956. The empire loses face. And that's all it takes. Superpowers don't die when they lose power. They die when the world sees that power was an illusion. Or maybe it's internal. A constitutional crisis. A contested 2028 election where neither side concedes. Mass protests. Riots. Governors refuse federal orders. The military fractures. Sound extreme? Go read history. This is what happened in Rome, when rival emperors claimed power. In Yugoslavia, when ethnic factions refused to acknowledge federal control. In the Soviet Union, when republics declared independence one by one. When the illusion of unity dies, the empire dies with it. The point is, you won't see it coming on the news. But when it happens, you'll feel it in your gut. The shelves empty, the dollar crashes, your bank freezes withdrawals, flights are grounded, social media goes dark, and everyone realizes all at once it's over. Stage 1 is fast, shockingly fast. The Soviet Union dissolved in 900 days. Lehman Brothers collapsed in 36 hours. The difference between warning and implosion is often just one weekend. And when it happens, no one will say we didn't see this coming. Because deep down, everyone knows. The pattern was always there. The question isn't if, it's when. So now you know. 6 stages of a collapse. Every single one already flashing red. Not in theory, in hard data. Rome saw them. Britain ignored them. The Soviet Union lied about them. And America is accelerating through them like a speeding train with no brakes, no conductor, and no one willing to admit the bridge is out. This isn't fear-mongering. This is historical reality. We've crossed the thresholds that no empire has ever come back from. Our debt is unpayable. Our money is fake. Our leaders are paralyzed. Our people are divided. Our enemies are watching, and our allies are hedging. Spain thought gold would save them. Britain thought prestige would. The Soviets thought control would. None of it mattered. Because collapse doesn't care how strong you used to be. It only cares how blind you are to what's happening now. The United States of America has already completed every stage but one. And the final stage? You won't see it coming. It'll look like just another Monday until banks close, shelves empty, and the dollar dies in real time. And when it happens, they'll tell you no one could have seen it coming. But you did. Because you were paying attention. Subscribe. Because when this system snaps, and it will, you'll need to understand why and what comes next. The future's not hidden. It's written in the wreckage of every empire that thought it was invincible. And the next chapter is already being written. You just have to decide whether you want to be caught in the collapse or ready for it.